Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Michael Kummer is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearance on episode 364 of Boundless Body Radio. Michael Kummer is a former professional sprinter, a CrossFit athlete, and the founder of MK Supplements, a dietary supplement brand that offers freeze-dried organ meat sourced from 100% pasture-raised cattle. He also hosts the Primal Shift podcast, which is awesome, by the way, and a very popular YouTube channel with more than 96,000 subscribers. Launched in 2012, his website, michaelkummer.com, has been visited by more than 10 million people and currently reaches between 70,000 and 90,000 users per month. On his site, Michael and his team publish rigorously researched articles with links to sound scientific evidence on topics including biohacking, fitness, nutrition, longevity, among others. Michael lives in the suburbs of Atlanta with his wife, Kathy, and their two children, Isabella and Lucas. The family operates a suburban homestead that features beehives, a flock of more than 50 chickens, meat rabbits, and geese. Born and raised in Salzburg, Austria, Michael is a two-time national champion in the 100-meter sprint and an avid CrossFitter. Michael Kummer, what an absolute honor just to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Cassie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I meant what I said when I talked about your podcast. I love your podcast. You do a great job.
Thank you.
You're able to like monologue really, really well for like 20, 30 minutes on a particular topic. So it's one of my favorites that if I've missed a few, I can just let it auto play. And regardless of whatever you're going to be talking about, I know I'm going to learn something. And you talk about such a wide variety of topics. And if nothing else, you have the coolest voice, dude. I'm so jealous of where you come from in the world because you've got a great voice for it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been called like from French to Australian, and the latest when someone asked me if I'm Indian, I'm like, I don't know how many Indians you've been around, but my accent is very much German, not so much Indian.
Not so much Indian. Yeah, I would have made that assumption. Oh, that's awesome, man. When we kind of reconnected and realized that, since hosting you the first time, which was a lot longer ago than I had imagined, you and I have gotten to meet in person. I've got to meet your wife first at KetoCon 2023 and then Hack Your Health 2024. Boy, a lot is going on with you guys. You changed a lot. A lot of things have been shifting, and I figured it was high time to get you back on to kind of give us an update of everything you've got going on.
Yeah. It's been a crazy ride. And, the funny thing is, you always think, well, you got it figured out, and then you learn something new because you don't know what you don't know. And suddenly you're like, oh, why didn't I, do this before? Or why has it been, why didn't I know this before? And it's been, for us with exercise, even with diet, diet is something that I've been feeling for a long time that I've dialed in quite well, but there's always something new. And I go back to certain things where I'm like, I was so opinionated on certain things, and I'm like, well, maybe it's not that simple, and you gotta have a little bit more, nuance to the whole story. I'm very much a black and white kind of guy, and the older I get, the more I realize nothing is black and white. There is a lot of in between, and it's really about figuring out what works for you and in what context, and understanding why. So you can leverage it instead of just, doing something that someone else tells you is good, or avoiding something that someone else tells you is bad, because it could be, but it might not, depending on the context and your individual circumstances.
Well, and you addressed that in a recent podcast that you gave where you're talking about, eating 2 to 3 times a day. And you explained how you had shifted a few things. And I love the kind of attitude around that where you said, like, look, like this is an experiment and it's for your own benefit. Like try things. You don't have to do what I say. You don't have to do what you did a month ago or a year ago because it worked for something then, but just have fun with it. Just relax with it. Like nobody can tell you what's going to be best for you. And that even changes. Like I said, that could be week to week, month to month, whatever, fits now versus then. And it's so funny because I actually have the copy of the introduction I used for you last time. And I printed it out thinking I would use it again this time. And as I'm reading through, I'm like, I assume you're still an Apple fan, a fan of Apple technology and Apple computers.
Yeah, well, I don't have an Apple Watch anymore, and
oh man,
I still use Apple equipment because I don't think the Windows world is any better, but I'm not a fan anymore. I think they're doing a lot of crap, they're producing crappy products. It's not that it just works, no longer applies, and it pisses me off because I need that stuff to work. I don't have time to fuck around with equipment.
That's a great example, dude. Like I
Yeah.
would have used this old introduction that was even 3 years ago, and even
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing I was the most sure you would still be into, you're not even into. So
No.
yeah, I think there's a lot of things we could address, and I love that attitude, like you said, of like make this fun for you. Like this is
Yeah.
not to make you miserable and hate life. This is to make it fun for you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that the problem is with, if you do something long enough and people start identifying you with certain traits or certain lifestyle choices, then you feel like you're boxed in, right? There are still so many people who come up to me and say, "Hey, when was the last time you ate something but meat?" And I'm like, I'm not a carnivore, I mean, yes, I eat a lot of animal products, but not exclusively. But there are people who think the only thing I eat is steak and liver, and that's not true. But that's the perception, and it's then very difficult sometimes to, for many people to say, okay, people see me in a certain way. I don't want to upset them, right? Because that's my success. That's who I am. But no, it's not. I am who I am because I do whatever the fuck I want. And so I think you need to, and maybe that applies more to influencers and people who put themselves out there and educate others, but it's still true for, I think, all of us, regardless of what you do in life. You are seen in a certain way, and it's kind of this, reinforcing your own kind of way of doing things. And you need to really carefully think about, does this benefit me? Does this help me in what I want to accomplish, health wise or in any other aspect of life? Or is it time to make a change and don't care about what people think? Or if they are upset because now you're no longer, eating only meat, I mean, it's not my problem. It's your problem if you're upset about that.
Yeah, I love that. People, and yeah, people can get upset, but you like it's your own ego that feels attacked. That feels
Yes.
like people are really taking it personally. And honestly, like people will probably forget about it soon anyway. So I love
Yeah.
that
No,
sentiment. I love that
yeah.
you're able to flow with that.
At the end of the day, nobody really cares. I mean,
Yeah.
you might get some negative feedback, but in the grander scheme of things, nobody gives a fuck what you do.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, I love that, man. Well, it's been long enough since you've been on, and I love your kind of story into health. This was not something you've always done, even though you've had that professional career and done so much sprinting. Tell us about how your kind of journey into where you are today kind of evolved from.
Yeah, we actually met a couple during a childbirth preparation class. That was, well, almost 10 years ago or so. And the guy was on a paleo diet. And so that kind of, I'd never heard about that before then. And so, I was interested because he seems to be very convinced about that type of eating is what we all should be doing. And I didn't buy it in the beginning, but the more and more I learn, I'm like, yeah, this kind of makes sense. And so it's kind of kickstarted our curiosity into thinking about what we eat and what's in those products that we buy in the supermarket. And that really kicked off a whole, I mean, everything else kind of followed from, cutting out added sugars or products with added sugars to reducing processed foods or cutting out processed foods, starting paleo, starting keto, starting carnivore, transitioning more to an animal-based framework, to transitioning to learning how to mitigate certain toxins in non-animal foods, meaning plants, by sprouting, fermenting, soaking, doing those things that humans have done for a very long time. And then really listening to how our bodies respond to certain foods. I'm convinced that the only thing that I can eat as much as I want to without any negative side effects is meat. Everything else is kind of, I can, but maybe only in certain amounts, or I have to do something to that food before it's compatible enough so I don't feel the consequences. And that's kind of, where we ended up. And then, of course, along the way, we discovered, environmental toxins in personal care products and in, paint and everything that we expose ourselves to in our modern world. We discovered, the need for tribalism, for community, for stress management, for different types of exercise and workout modalities, from CrossFit to something as simple as walking, and even standard gym type of workouts like hamstring curls, which I thought for a very long time is like a complete waste of time. You need functional movements, but I realized that there is a place for. I mean, I would not propose, go and do biceps curls. I think that I still think that's a very useless type of exercise. from a functional perspective. But if that what makes you happy and that's your way of moving and increasing, lean muscle tissue, by all means, do what, enjoy. And so that's kind of, and then of course, the big food has really been at the center of much of what we do today. And the realization that our society, at least here in the US and in many other countries as well, is simply not set up in a way that makes it conducive to produce healthy food. Even if you want to do it right, as soon as you want to start selling that food to someone else, and you have to adhere to USDA and FDA and whatever other government type of regulations, you're set up in a way that you have to produce less than optimal food. Be it, dunking your chickens in chlorine before you sell them, washing the eggs, before you can sell them, um, pasteurizing milk, in many states before you can sell that milk. There is no way of, here in Georgia, if I want to, if you're, if you come to me and say, hey, I would like to buy the eggs from your chickens, I can give them to you for free and it would be legal. But if I get money for it, and if I'm not certified egg handler and the eggs are not washed and all of those things, it would be illegal.
Oh my goodness.
And so, it's like you really gotta, produce your own food, do something that's not entirely legal, or kind of try to work around. But in our case, like, we gotta produce, most of what we eat, at least the core of it, the stuff that we need, and then maybe the things that we want, be it, avocados from Mexico or whatever, that we don't really need to thrive. That we could, we can buy those. That's all right if we can find the best, versions possible. But the core of it, the animal protein, the eggs that we consume, we gotta grow ourselves, because otherwise it's always less than optimal.
Yeah, that's very well explained. I love that. And thinking about again, like the core, the bulk of what you do. Like I consider myself a carnivore. Will I have some tomatoes if they're at a farmer's market? Yes. Will I have a melon if it's ripe and available? Yes. I don't think that doesn't make me a carnivore. It's just like
Right.
it's those things are the exception. They're not the rule. They're not what
Yes.
I do. They're not the core. And
Right.
so I love that you make that framework of like, yeah, buy some avocados from the store. You want an onion with the burger? Like that's not going to be the thing that is going to, get most people to upset. So I really like that. And then I really want you to reinforce this because I think this is important. When you started learning about the diet, you became convinced that paleo was a great way to go. Your wife was not quite there yet. Can you talk a little bit about the consternation of, you being that kind of black and white and saying, hey, we're doing this, and like, wait, not so
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah, I don't think she would phrase it quite the same way. When you said she was not entirely convinced, she was pissed that I decided overnight that starting tomorrow I'm going to be on a paleo diet, fully knowing that she was the one preparing our meals, right? So I basically told her, you need to cook differently for me, unless, or you jump on the bandwagon and we all do paleo. And so that was kind of the gist. And she was absolutely not thrilled, because paleo is not, I mean, she's from Costa Rica, and so she grew up on rice and beans and an entirely different diet that, yes, includes animal products, obviously, but also a lot of things that are not paleo friendly, including grains and legumes, right? And so that was a major problem at the time, because I'm like, if we don't do this, we all gonna die a painful death, sooner than later. I'm not overly dramatic, but I'm like, I was so convinced that our current dietary framework is gonna ruin us. And I don't think it was entirely wrong, but where I was wrong was certainly the way I approached it, and and not giving her a chance to say, hey, think about this, maybe do some research and let's see what your conclusions are, and let's see, what we can do better tomorrow. Doesn't mean we have to change our entire diet overnight, but maybe we can do something better and take it step by step. And I didn't do this, so it took her a little while to kind of get over the initial phase of being upset, and then doing her own research and coming to the same conclusion that, yeah, we need to change our diet.
Yeah. There's a life lesson in there somewhere, and I can't decide which bucket to put it in. It's either like human relations, or it's nutrition, or maybe it's just marriage lessons. Like it's just
uh,
marriage counseling.
I think it's communication, how you approach problems,
Yeah.
and it's very easy, and that's what I often point out. There are a lot of influencers out there that I admire, for what they do, but they are, lone wolves. You can do, if you want to change something overnight, do it. You're not going to upset anyone. And the ones you upset, you don't care about because they are not your immediate family, likely. Those might be fans or what have you. But if there is a spouse involved, if there are kids involved, it becomes a little bit more complicated, right? And so you need to approach this in a more nuanced manner. And even I would argue that for most people, even if they're alone, doing something radical might not be sustainable because they, might not be able to really push through and accept the suck that will likely follow for a while, right? And then they go back to what they did before. And it's like with dieting, oh, I want to lose 30 pounds, I'm gonna, not eat anything for a week. Well, guess what you're gonna do in a week? You're gonna eat everything that you're not supposed to, and you gain all of that weight back. And the same approach is, with changing dietary frameworks. And so I think for most people, doing something better, as small as it might be, immediately, and doing, improving every day a little bit is better than going all in. So I think
Yeah.
that was the lesson that I learned. I'm still, if I want to do something and it only applies to me or it only affects me, I just do it and I know I can sustain it. But I
Cool.
also appreciate that not everyone can and should do that.
Yeah, I love that. The journey that you've taken through nutrition is one I observe quite a bit. And I do like it. It's kind of like you've got this wide, um, I don't know, kind of a wide net of all these things that you can be eating. And as you learn, paleo, eventually that usually leads to keto or low carb, whatever, however you want to call it,
Yeah.
eventually into carnivore. Like the array, the width of the things that you're eating gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And a lot of people make it to some form of a carnivore diet, a ketogenic diet, whatever it is, where there's not tons of variety. You're sticking with all the safe things and not really having any of the other things. But then there's also, like, on the back end, a little bit of an opening. I don't see tons and tons of people that stick with very strict carnivore diets unless there's a health reason that they absolutely need to.
Yeah.
And that motivation is quite high and it keeps them there. But the pattern I notice more often is that, yeah, like you're narrowing it down, you get to carnivore maybe, and then you can kind of slowly open things back up. Can you talk about what that process was like for you? Like eliminating things, obviously, first goes all the junk, then goes all the things you never thought you would, be healthy without, and then what it's like to also open that up on the back end.
Yeah, I think what narrowing it down to, possibly only meat allows you is to heal. If you have any sort of issues, and gut and digestive issues are so prevalent, you really learn what feeling good means. How you're supposed to feel, because that changes your baseline. And once you know how you're supposed to feel, you can immediately tell if something doesn't sit well with you. If you're really feeling crappy, you're not going to be able to tell a difference, eating a burger from McDonald's versus, a homemade, maybe sourdough, or something else that's significantly healthier. You're not going to be able to tell the difference because you're constantly feeling less than ideal, right? But once you feel great and you have, I don't know, maybe that onion, and you realize, hey, maybe, you know what, onions with my burger is not gonna doesn't work for me. It makes, it causes, GI distress, or makes me bloated, or whatever the case might be. So maybe I can have the burger but without the onions. Before, you would have not been able to tell, right? And so that's what I really like about removing everything but meat for a while, because meat is that one thing that for most people is doesn't cause any issues. Now, if you have, low, gastric or digestive juices, or low digestive enzymes, and those, digesting protein and fat can be problematic. But outside of that, it's the most compatible food for humans, I would argue. But then once you have your baseline, you can, okay, let's try tomatoes. Oh, you know what? Tomatoes, they are fine. Or maybe tomatoes in summer are fine, but in winter, they don't sit well with me because of maybe they are not ripened, on the plant, but maybe, in storage. Or yeah, it really allows you to figure out what you can get away with, in the sense that it does not negatively impact your health. And so that's what I like about that approach. And it has been incredibly insightful for me and for my wife as well, where we've learned, well, raw milk, something that a lot of people rave about, just doesn't sit well with us. I love the taste of raw milk. I could drink gallons of it, but I smell like a pig if I do, and my skin breaks out. Doesn't matter if it's A2 and grass fed, and from the local farm, next door. I don't do well with it. I wish I did, but I don't. And so that's something. If you just listen to others that tell you, "Oh, raw milk is great for you. It's a health food. It's superfood, what have you." That might be true if you're someone like the Maasai, who only drink milk and blood. I'm not a Maasai, so I don't do well with it. Or maybe I don't do well with it because I don't mix it with blood. I don't know, but I can tell the raw milk by itself, not so great for me. And that's one of the things where opening it up slowly enables you to find out, and then you can build a framework that works for you. That might include things that are maybe not so great for everybody. Like in our case, if I eat cherry tomatoes that we grow, I don't feel anything. If I eat even jalapeno peppers, that arguably, I mean, the stuff that makes them so spicy, those are anti-nutrients. Those are the plant's way of telling you, don't eat me. But I seem to be doing fine with those. But maybe with onions that I love the taste of, not so much. Garlic that I really like, not so much. So it really helps you to figure out a dietary framework that works for you and that's sustainable for you.
Yeah, and that framework is so well said because again, the core, the main stuff is still the same. It's still
Yes.
a species appropriate diet,
Yeah.
but there are individual differences that you can play around with.
Yeah.
Sourdough, one thing you guys we're recently talking about sourdough has a vastly different effect between you and your wife. Like you can tolerate it
Yes.
much better than she can.
Yeah. 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 And it pisses her off.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
uh, that's a really good example. And then you alluded to this earlier, and I think it's worth talking about because I don't think people talk about it enough. We talk about what foods to eat, but we don't talk very much at all about what you mentioned earlier, like how are we going to prepare these foods? And
Yeah.
there's a big difference there that I don't think we talk about. So, what are some of the ways that you have learned to prepare different things to make those plant foods safer and at least have less questions on whether this is going to do something beneficial for me or not?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. So a couple of things that we've learned is, fermentation is one way to not only reduce the glycemic index, but to get rid of some of the anti-nutrients. So we ferment, for example, a lot of the potatoes, be it sweet potatoes or regular ones. So we either slice them into, fries or chips or what have you, and we ferment them in a saline solution just for a couple of days before eating them. That seems to be doing, we seem to be doing significantly better with that. We soak the rice overnight if we have rice, and we don't have rice, and I mean, we don't have plants very often, period, comparatively speaking. But when we do, rice, we soak it first 24 hours and then we cook it in bone broth. So you get not only you leach out some of those anti-nutrients by the soaking, obviously discard the water and don't cook it in the dirty water, so to say. But then cooking it in bone broth, you get some of the benefits of the bone broth. So it elevates the nutritional value of the rice a little bit. And it's not just carbohydrates because there's not really much in rice that, I mean, yes, some protein, but it's more for the taste and for eating something that is enjoyable for many people and not so much from a nutritional value. So doing that, helps a lot. We pickle and we ferment a lot of things. Sourdough, you gave the example. I mean, it's still at the end of the day empty calories. There's nothing in sourdough that you need, from a micronutrient perspective. But I grew up on bread in Austria, and my wife grew up with bread in Costa Rica. It's a more of a cultural, social kind of thing that, when I have my cheese and charcuterie board, and have like a couple of slices of sourdough bread with it, I like that. It makes me happy having that meal. It's enjoyable having that meal. I don't need it from a nutrition perspective, but from a emotional perspective, there is a benefit to it. And that's maybe also one of the arguments that's often forgotten. Yes, food is predominantly, instruction and fuel for our body. It's something that we need, to allow ourselves to do what they do. But there's also a social component to it, sharing a meal with friends. And even if that mean, if you have a glass of wine, or have a bottle of wine on the table and you share it with friends, there's arguably a social and emotional component to it that has benefits. Now, does that benefit outweigh maybe the negatives by drinking alcohol? That depends, I want to say, and it very, and that's where, all of the context and nuance comes into the picture, because if you sit by yourself in front of the TV, watching TV and, drinking a bottle of wine, I would argue that the benefits don't outweigh the negatives of doing that. But if you have a glass of wine in a social environment, maybe you sit outside, at a campfire, whatever, and you really enjoy yourself, your stress levels are down, you're in fully parasympathetic mode. And I would argue that there is a potentially a net positive to that, a net benefit to that, So that doesn't mean alcohol is good, but it can be less detrimental in the right setup, right? And so that applies to many, many other things as well, including, different types of food that might not be on the surface, might not be ideal for you. That jalapeno peppers is one example. I mean, there is arguably, it's you can taste the way of the plant saying, "Don't eat me." I mean, you start sweating, it burns, and all of the signs of, that they're maybe not meant to be eaten. But nonetheless, there can be a positive to it, and you really need to be careful and figure out what you can get away with, what makes sense for you and your context, and what doesn't.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I remember this is 15 years ago. I hardly drink wine at all anymore, but the really popular wine glass manufacturer, I believe the brand was called Riedel, and the CEO or the founder, whoever it was, said,
Riedel, German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said something along the lines of like, you could have the best wine in our best glass, and it won't be as good as having boxed wine in a solo cup if you're sharing that with others and friends. And it kind of goes along with what you're saying. You need to consider all of those things. I love that. And these processes that you are describing, I would think, I would say they're not as difficult as people may think. Like soaking rice. Take some time, take some effort, take some preparation. You need to think about this the day before. The sweet potatoes fermenting. Yeah, that's more effort, the stuff you've got to do at home. I think it's worth it to do those kinds of things. But when contrast that to what you were talking about earlier in this conversation, like you live in a society, in a system that is not doing those things. They're never going to do those things. They're not going to take the time and process that out. They're trying to get a cheap, industrial product out and get you hooked and addicted as quickly as possible. They're not sitting around waiting for their sweet potatoes to finish fermenting. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and that's, I think, the crux of it all. The society we live in is exactly the opposite of what we need for optimal health, because we need to go back to how things were done, where food is not fast. Food is not just, "Oh, I'm gonna eat it on the way to work because I don't have time to sit down and have a proper meal," ideally in a family setting with others. The farther away you go from what humans used to do, depending on how long humans have been around, there are, varying opinions on that. But I believe that we've been around for quite some time, and we used to do things entirely differently. Eating something was, sitting together, at the end of a successful hunt or a successful gathering or whatever, we would sit together, we would share the food, we would have it in a community, and it would not be something where, you get the check before you have finished your last bite, and so if you just keep that in mind, then food is never fast. Preparing it is not fast. I mean, yes, there are cases where, well, slicing that sourdough sandwich or that bread that you hopefully baked, and making a sandwich, which is quick, well, but it still meant you made the sourdough. It took you 3 days to prepare that freaking, loaf of bread so you could then slice it and have a quicker or more convenient meal. I'm not saying that everything that's convenient is bad, but I think we're overdoing it with convenience. Convenience is killing us. We need to go back to inconvenient, slower things that are not any less enjoyable. It's just that, I don't have time to cook. But cooking can be fun, can be enjoyable, especially if you do it as a team. If you and your spouse prepare that meal together, maybe the kids chime in. It can be something. It's just changing your perception of what's important, changing your priorities, because I think food is something so fundamental for us. So is sleep and fresh air and high quality drinking water and all of those things. They need to have the appropriate priority in our lives. If they have not, we'll pay for it, one way or the other, And so I think it's changing our priorities a little bit and putting less emphasis on, oh, I need to sign up my kids to a million different after school activities, and I need to do this and that and anything in between. No, take a chill pill, touch some grass, and prepare your own meal,
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking when you said like, oh, I don't have time for that. It's like we all have the same amount of time in every day. It's what you make time for. And of course we're
Yes.
busy and we have busy lives, but you can make some things work and at least push in
Yeah.
that direction a little bit. You can figure some things out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned the hunt, you mentioned the animal that we would have killed and shared, which absolutely was true. And also that animal would have had some organs in it, a much smaller
Yes.
proportion than the muscle, but I
Yeah.
can't host you on the show without talking about the importance of organ meat. It
Yeah.
is ongoing, the hottest topic in the carnivore world. It
Yeah.
seems like everybody's talking about whether you need them, how much do you need. Paul Saladino famously, eating a ton of them and then moving away from them, and everybody seems to be really confused about them. So where are you currently on your ideas around the consumption of organs?
Yeah. I don't think you need a ton of them. I think you know, I think that you should be eating some organs. And the way I approach it as well, let's say we butcher a cow, and that cow gives us 400 pounds of muscle meat, let's say, and X number of pounds of organs. I mean, the liver is, I don't know, what, 10, 11 pounds of that animal. If we
Big.
were to chop up that entire animal and say, okay, we're going to have food now for half a year, well, we're going to have organs for half a year as well. If we chop up that 11-pound liver into small, I don't know, a couple of ounces, during the week or whatever, if we chop up the heart, the kidneys, and anything in between, we would have a good amount of organs for that half year, right? I don't need to eat a pound of liver every day because then the liver would be gone in 11 days. That's unrealistic because that liver is usually shared. It's not just me eating the entire cow and the entire liver, right? And so I do think you need some, you benefit from some. Now, if you're on a standard American diet, if you're on a vegan diet, and you switch over to only eating muscle meat and nothing else, I would say you're better off than you were before. Is that the optimal state? Probably not. And that's why I would assume a lot of the strict carnivores eat eggs, because eggs also happen to be a great source of micronutrients, in particular the yolk, right? Which feeds the growing chick for 3 days after hatching or for up to 3 days after hatching. The egg white is the buffer that cushions the chick. It's a waste product, so it makes me always, chuckle when I hear someone ordering an egg white omelet, like an waste product omelet. I mean, why would you do that, But no, nonetheless, so there is something more than muscle meat. I think that we need to get everything that it could be eggs. Are they 100% substitute for organs? I don't think so. There is a lot of, there are even, peptides and coenzymes that we are not even fully aware of what they do and how they work. Just to give you one great example, I talked about this on I think that episode is already out, but there was an experiment in the 1950s conducted with rats
I was
and
going to ask you about this.
feeding them, at the standard rat diet, which was a fortified diet. Think of like, fortified cereals that humans would get. So a standard American diet, just fortified with synthetic vitamins. And then I had a second group of rats that they got injected with B vitamins because the researchers thought that there are certain vitamins that can boost endurance, right? And B vitamins were highly suspected because they are, responsible, especially B12, for, energy metabolism and many, many other things that are important for, well, producing energy in the mitochondria. And then the third group was fed liver powder, right? Similar to, what we sell at MK Supplements. I think it was even freeze-dried beef liver powder. And so those three groups of rats were put into a water tank and they had to swim. And while the water was at relatively warm temperature, I think it was 98 degrees or so warm, so like kind of like a hot tub almost. All three groups swam for 2 hours. So nobody had any issues sustaining being in the water. But as soon as the water temperature was dropped to 68, 65, 68 degrees, so colder, but not like an ice bath, but significantly colder, the group of rats in the first two groups, the standard rat diet and the B vitamin injected group, they all drowned within 14 minutes. They couldn't sustain it anymore. For whatever reason. And the liver fat group, most of those rats, I think, except with the exception of three, the one rat died or drowned at 67, the other one at 80 something, and all of the others swam for 2 hours without drowning, and they stopped the experiment. So there was something apparently in liver from a micronutrient perspective that allowed those rats under increased stress levels to perform better and not to drown, right? And so that tells me that there is, and nobody knows exactly yet what that component was. Was it a specific vitamin? Was it a mineral? Was it a combination? Was it an enzyme? Who knows? Nobody knows. At least I don't know. And so, that tells me that there is something in organs that we apparently need, especially if we are under increased stress, which I would argue most of us are. I mean, if you live like the life somewhere on an island and you have no stress whatsoever, you just do, whatever can you do you benefit from eating extra organs? Maybe not. You'll probably be fine eating just your steak every day, maybe with a couple of eggs for breakfast. But for everyone else, I think there is a benefit of consuming organs. Now, it's not like the Liver King that you have to, eat, raw balls and liver every single day until you puke. But there is a benefit to having some, for some, like my grandparents, we actually, I took the kids to Austria a couple of weeks ago, and we celebrated my grandmom's 93rd and my grandfather's 92nd birthday. And we were having dinner in a classic, like traditional Austrian restaurant. And my grandfather, 92 years old, he ordered liver. And I love it. I took a picture. I'm like, this is, he doesn't eat liver every day, but he eats it regularly, and so I think that's what it is, just eat some organs. If you want to pop 4 pills every single day because it's convenient and because you have it like we do, there's nothing wrong with that. If you have fresh liver once a week that you prepare yourself, that's probably good enough too, So I would just say eat some. Don't stress over it. Don't make it like, if you stress that, oh, today I forgot taking my liver pills, that stress is probably more of a downside than it is, that what benefits you can get from eating that liver. So eat it as much as you can. There is no way of overdoing it really, unless you eat the liver of a polar bear, which is like 10,000 times the amount of vitamin A. But the liver of a ruminant animal or even chicken livers, you cannot possibly overdo it. Eat it as much as you like, and you'll probably be good.
Okay. Wow. I love that. I wonder if my practices of consuming organs has not been regular enough, but I can say I've tried it many, many times. Maybe for just as long as a few weeks. And I really have to be honest and say I can't tell a huge, huge difference one way or another. I do consume quite a bit of eggs, so maybe that's the difference. But
Yeah.
I will say this: I do take your liver supplement, which I love. Before hockey games once a week. And I don't know if it's placebo, but I seem to I like look forward to it somehow. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
something you can taste a little bit in the supplement itself. It's just a capsule, but there's something about it. I feel like it does me benefit if I take it 30 minutes to an hour with an electrolyte kind of a drink before I step on the ice and play an hour and a half of difficult hockey. Would that kind of match up with the results of that study that you talked about?
Probably, I would assume, and obviously, it also depends a little bit on, so 10% of the rats died was liver, So I guess if you wanna have the same noticeable effect, you would have to consume 10% of your diet on that day in the form of liver, the 4 capsules or whatever you take, they are the equivalent of, those are 3 grams, and that's the equivalent of maybe 15-ish grams of fresh liver. That's not a huge amount, and intentionally so, because a lot of people are afraid of overdosing. But we have some customers that say, you know what, on days where I have a competition or whatever, I take 8 or 12 capsules, and I do that as well. Now, again, if I already had 8 eggs for breakfast and a steak, do I benefit from that extra, or do I get some of whatever is in liver also from those other foods? Possibly, you know. But I also think that the more dialed in you are, the healthier you are, the less of an impact you'll notice immediately. There are some customers that, take liver for the first time, and suddenly their energy levels are through the roof because they've been so deficient in B12 and in iron and in some of the other things, that they notice it much more. I'm not deficient as far as I can tell, at least not to greater extents in anything, because I eat a ton of eggs, I eat a ton of meat, and I do eat organs. So for me, how much I notice it on a daily basis is significantly different to someone who is deficient in something. I take it predominantly as a kind of like as an insurance to make sure I cover all of the micro gaps that I have that I might not notice immediately, but that will likely affect me, long term. And that could mean, if my brain performs 2% better during the day and if I'm 2% more productive, that's compounding benefit, for me. Now, can I pinpoint and I said, oh, today, I don't know, I did something 2% better? Probably not. But over time, when I look back then and when other people, like kind of, analyze what I do and my output over time, they're like, how on earth, do you manage to, homeschool your kids? And that is together with my wife. Obviously, I'm not doing everything by myself, but cook all of the meals from scratch, maintain 80 heads of livestock, have the supplements business, the blogging business, the real estate investment business, launching the coffee brand, and work out and do all of those things without falling apart, and still at the evening being like, I'm feeling good, I could go work out now, and so I think it's really the combination of all of those things, and organs play a role. How big of a role? Hard to tell, but I would not want to just cut them out and say, you know what, I don't need them.
Got it. Okay, perfect. That was a great answer. And then for somebody like me who did not grow up around organs, do not have the taste for them, somebody gave me a few years ago one of those cow livers, and they're huge, and it's probably still vacuum sealed in my freezer because it's so intimidating for me to even do it. What's your favorite kind of fresh preparation if somebody were to do more fresh liver?
I mean, honestly, if you trust the source, I would, when you get it and it's not frozen yet, I would cut it into small cubes that you would freeze individually, and then just pop one and even swallow it without chewing. If you absolutely don't like the taste and you just want to get the benefits, that's a great way of doing it. Eating liver raw, just from a micronutrient perspective, is the best way of doing it, because cooking and freeze drying, you denature some of those vitamins. Now, freeze drying is relatively good in that regard, but still, you lose some because you process it in one way or another. So I would eat it raw. I found that bison liver, if you have a farmer's market nearby and they sell bison liver, is relatively mild and better, in my opinion, than beef liver to eat it raw. I also like to make pate, and the trick with pate is, I've noticed, a ton of fat, like significantly. If you think one stick, add 3 sticks of butter, kind of, and just blend it up, spice it a little bit with salt or whatever you like. And I love it with cheese, just spread it on cheese or on sourdough bread, if that's your thing. There is liverwurst, you make it yourself is maybe a little bit more involved, but if you want to buy it, liverwurst or pate, if you don't want to make it yourself, is one way of getting it in. I'm not a fan of just pan frying the liver, cow liver in particular. I mean, I've eaten it, I can eat it, but it would not be something that I'm like, oh, I'm looking forward to having, pan fried liver.
Yeah, got it. I also heard a really good trick that, like, when you're out at a restaurant, order whatever organs they have, so that not only do you not have to prepare it, but you don't have to cook it in your house or whatever that
Yes.
might smell
Yeah.
things up or whatever. So anytime I go to a Brazilian restaurant, I get the coração, the chicken hearts, and they're really, really
Yeah.
good. So
I mean, chicken hearts are delicious. I mean, if
they
you
are.
just put them on a skewer, grill them, put them in a pan, and they don't, heart, the thing, or well, chicken liver, but also chicken heart in particular, or heart, generally speaking, is a muscle meat. It tastes like muscle meat. If you close your eyes and you eat heart, you're probably not going to be able to tell that it's not a type of steak.
Yeah. It's absolutely delicious. I ate a ton of it when I was in Brazil, and yeah, they're very, very good. And so this is, again, where the benefit of what you do at MK Supplements is you make it into a capsule. People don't need to think about it. I can throw a few in, to my mouth and drink it with my electrolyte shake before hockey. It's very convenient. I don't have to do any of the preparation. So this in one way would be a biohack. This is something I love, the way you talk about these things and the difference
Right.
between using something that's very helpful versus the I guess, I don't know, the quote unquote world of biohacking and how that can slide into something that was, easy and helpful, but also like, are we really missing the point here? You did an episode not too long ago called
Yeah.
Biohacking or Bullshit that I absolutely love. So I'd love for you to comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, not to, I don't know the person. I don't know Brian Johnson personally. He might be the greatest guy in the world. I don't know him, but just from what I see, what he does, I think that's like I'm like, I don't want to do exactly the opposite. I don't want to have a biohack, a supplement, a huge supplement regimen and a feeding schedule. Like, I'm not a toddler or like, an animal where I need a feeding schedule. I eat when I'm hungry and I don't eat when I'm not. Um, but I think that pushes the envelope, that goes overboard and will have for most people negative consequences. It's expensive, it's not sustainable. It's certainly not sustainable if you were to live out in the woods, you could not do any of that. It relies on synthetic stuff, on processed foods. And so, you know, I think it's fine if you say, you know what, I have to work in an office, and the best I can do to kind of mitigate the light source that I cannot change is to put an incandescent red light bulb on my desk to get something else than the blue light. That's fine. But saying that, oh, okay, I'm gonna build a new house now, like what we are doing, and so I'm going to make sure that we have EMF blocking paint everywhere, so I don't have to turn off my Wi-Fi at night. That kind of defeats the purpose. Turn off your Wi-Fi so you don't need to worry about the EMF blocking paint. Or have windows in your office if you are in control of your environment instead of trying to mitigate. It's always better to address the root cause than to mitigate it. The same is with supplements. Instead of saying, okay, I need a vitamin D supplement, well, why didn't you just go out in the sun? Or increase your intake in wild caught salmon, has vitamin D as well. In winter, maybe when the sun is not as strong. So there are ways on how you can approach certain things. And I think with biohacking, we've gone overboard. We try to mitigate things that can be fixed at the root,
Yeah, I love that. The way, yeah, the way I look at it as seeing it as the most helpful, as an example, would be what most people do in the evening time. There's probably going to be some television time or some Netflix of some kind. I do it too. Like I work
Yeah.
until 6:30. I eat my dinner. I want to relax. I want to go sit in my sauna. There's a component, I believe, of what you mentioned earlier, the storytelling, the gathering where we all get together, we talk about our day, and find something chill on Netflix to watch, and that's kind of a storytelling thing. And so but there's also blue light coming from your device, whatever you're
Yeah.
using. So a nice hack would be the blue light glasses. So that's something that somebody could work around and say, like, okay, I'm going to be doing this thing. There is a bit of risk, and it might affect my sleep, especially like you said, like a compounding effect night after night after night for a really long time. This is
Yeah.
something I can do to at least take the edge off. That's
Yes.
different though than like I'm going to watch something mild on Netflix, or I'm going to keep scrolling on social media for another
Yeah.
3 hours, or I'm going to play games on my phone for another 3 hours. Like, again, it's just one of those things you have to really balance.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not a huge fan of everything in moderation or, balance this and balance that. But there is obviously balance in everything that you need to do. And it's not about balancing, the balance between eating cigarettes and eating fast food. No, that's not the balance, but if you need to balance between eating only meat and some other things that you happen to prepare, maybe grow in your own garden, that's a balance that I can get behind. And the same applies to, biohacking. Yes. If I'm, if I'm on an airplane, I might wear my EMF blocking shirt, so I get less exposed to stuff. Now, that's not my go-to shirt every single day. I'd rather, remove myself or remove EMFs from my life, from my environment where I have the opportunity, but I mitigate where I don't. Hopefully you don't live in a world where you cannot control anything and you have to mitigate everything. I mean, that's a really move, to get out of it. Um, but there is obviously a way to, and a need to apply mitigation and mitigating techniques when you don't have control over the environment.
Yeah, you and I talked about this offline, but like going to this biohacking conference that you just went to, maybe you could just comment on like how ridiculous it is that everybody's like inside and with the artificial lighting and all this stuff, trying to find biohacks for like getting more red light and whatever.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was Dave Asprey's, conference, and it's always. I mean, obviously, I understand why those conferences are inside. Obviously, it cannot be outside, and then it's raining and whatnot. So I get the idea, but just being in this, darkish kind of environment with artificial light, with recirculated air, with EMFs everywhere because everyone needs Wi-Fi and cellular connectivity, and those are typically boosted so everyone has access, etc. And I'm like, and then people running around, with yellow glasses and stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I make it a point that every couple of hours, I go outside and I take my shirt off, and I sit in the sun. That's my mitigation, to being inside where, I choose to be. I understand I can choose not to, but it's kind of part of my job. So I am there, but I try to mitigate it or mitigate it by addressing the root cause and exposing myself to something that's good for me. And then I can, hopefully, my body can handle more of the not so good stuff.
Yeah, I love that. I just got back from San Diego at a conference and realized that the conference center is dark and, same kind of environment. And
Yeah.
these talks go for almost an hour and a half, but there's also a live stream. And I just decided like for there are a few of the talks, actually, I'm just going to sneak out back. There's a cool place in the back that has like nice chairs to sit out in the sun. I did the same thing, took my shirt
Right.
off. Nobody knew the difference that I wasn't in the conference center. I just got to
Right.
watch the whole thing on my
Yeah.
phone and got vitamin D in the middle of the day. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much better.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a great
Yeah.
example.
That's awesome. I look at your life and the things you have created around you, and man, it looks pretty ideal. You're homesteading. You're going to be getting to, like a different property here pretty soon. You're getting the sunlight. You're getting the grounding. You during the homeschool with the kids, I think is awesome. The food that you do. Yeah, there's a lot of things in there that you have to do, and you're being very intentional about it, which I absolutely
Yeah.
love. And I think I've heard you comment on this before, and I would get annoyed about this too. Somebody says like, "Oh, Michael, that your life sounds amazing. I could never do that. There's no way I could ever do that." It's like, well, yes, you could. Like you could take, move away, get out, like you said. If you're not in control in your environment, there's places you can go, there's things you could do. So I
Right.
understand that part. For somebody like myself who understands, like I know that I could create something like you have, I could live in that way. I just also know that I'm probably not going to.
Hmm.
Um, my work is here. My wife's work is here. We have clients and people that we work with, our home, our
Yeah.
neighborhood, all this stuff. So I look at what you're doing. I think it's amazing, but I also think like I just know for myself I would not. For somebody like that, what kind of steps would you want somebody to be thinking about to be taking that they could work into their normal lifestyle? Besides maybe some of the ones we've already discussed about preparing some of your own food, like what are some other things people can be thinking about as far as like getting a little bit closer to the way we evolved?
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say, stop thinking about what could be, but will likely never be, because I don't, if you don't, if you don't feel like you want to do this for whatever reason, stop thinking about how your life could be if you did, because it's not going to happen, and you're just going to stress out and get frustrated over what you don't have because you're not willing to, to do that. And there's no, we all die at some point, so it's not that just by me doing this, maybe I get run over by the bus tomorrow and, all of it was for nothing, I mean, we don't know, right? At the end of the day, I think you need to do what you enjoy. I think that's a major component. I think stress overall is a major component, and I recently I realized that if I'm on when I'm on vacation, let's say we go not every year, but every so often we go to Tulum in Mexico, and we are like in a small boutique hotel, and the last time we went there, we arrived at what 2 in the afternoon, and I had a margarita. And by the time, evening rolled around and we had dinner, I think I had 4 margaritas, which is something that I don't do. I don't drink a lot. And funny enough, the next morning I woke up and I felt completely fine. And I'm like, if I did this at home, I would feel like shit the next day. What is different? Well, one of the things that's different is my stress level, my exposure to sun. I'm outside all day. I'm under the sun. I'm absolutely not stressed. And so my body has more resources to deal with less than ideal lifestyle choices, right? And so that's one of the things I would say, that try to do as much as you can what you want and get away from the things that you have to do. And it doesn't really matter if you're in an apartment or on a farm, the same concept applies. There are so many. The other day, I actually heard on the Austrian national radio, there's a big wave right now of suicide within the farming community and depression. And I'm like, how does that add up? And if I'm a farmer, if I'm working with animals, why the heck would I be depressed? Well, it is because it's gotten so difficult that most of those farmers have a main a day job, and then they farm on the side. And so by doing that farming on the side, they don't improve their health. They deteriorate your health because it's so stressful, right? And so I think that's one of the first things, that you really want to take account and inventory of what you're doing every day, and how much of that is stuff that you really want to do, and how much of that stuff is things that you think you have to do, or someone tells you have to do, that you don't really. And so cut that stuff out. And I think that's a great way of improving your health immediately, and you don't even have to do anything extra. I mean, obviously from there you'll probably realize that, well, maybe that circle of friends that I go out with every weekend, get drunk with, I don't really, that's not really that enjoyable. I just do it because I kind of feel compelled to, and not because I truly enjoy it. And once you start peeling back the layers, you'll find your way, whatever that way might be, but it's something that you ultimately want to do. And I would argue that most people want to do things that make them feel better, and not things that make them feel like crap.
Yeah, I love them. I love that. When we first got exposed to like step trackers, I wanted to get out and go walk because I was motivated by hitting a particular number, getting at least 10,000, or maybe I was in a
Yeah.
competition and trying to get more. But I mean, before long, you realize the benefit of this is not getting a bunch of steps, being out walking, like you said earlier,
Yes.
getting in my
Yeah.
minimal footwear or
Yeah.
walking barefoot outside, connecting with the ground. Like it's such a benefit to my life. Like I do it not for the motivation of the steps, but for any other
Right.
reason. And just to conclude, opening this conversation off record, I asked you if there was something you wanted to talk about, if there was something you wanted to make sure that we promoted in this conversation, and you said, no, this is free information. I just want to get this information out there. And I have so much respect for you, and you've definitely done that in this conversation. We've covered a lot of really awesome and practical tips. You do provide a product that is helpful and beneficial for a lot of people, including myself, who, just really don't have the taste of liver. I'm remotivated. I'm going to try it again and see if I can get back into it. But yeah, I really appreciate your attitude with this conversation and being willing to discuss anything that would be beneficial to the listener. So thank you so very much, Michael. It's been great to reconnect. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, I mean, just from the biohacking site, michaelkummer.com. If you're more interested in the farming angle, kummerhomestead.com is where we share stuff, and the corresponding YouTube channels and Instagram. Obviously, Kummer Homestead and mkummer82 is my handle typically on most social media for the health and fitness stuff. But yeah, just go to michaelkummer.com. From there on the homepage, you'll branch off to all of the things that we do, and encourage you to learn more. Most of the stuff is free. There are a few products that I sell, but everything else is really free. And that's really the one thing. The best things in life are often free. You just need to be willing to get uncomfortable occasionally, and do it.
I love that. Well, that makes me motivated to get outside and take my shirt off and get some
Yeah.
sunshine. I'm sure it does you as well. So for now, Michael, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy life to be on our show today. It's an honor to host you, and I consider you a really good friend. I really, really appreciate you. So thank you for taking the time to be on our show today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Casey. Appreciate it too.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.